We've also asked in the agenda if we've prioritized settings or places that we need to assess. While the transition plan actually does identify all the settings that we are going to do an assessment on, but there isn't a prioritization of those at this point. Just wanted to point out that we are going to be having the next meeting of our advisory group in regards to implementation of these new regulations. It's scheduled for April 29th. Some of the things that we want to do during that meeting is work with the group in developing a timeline for the assessments and other activities that are going to need to take place in order to meet these requirements. And part of that is going to be, that requirement is, or those activities is going to be developing strategies to do the communication, provide guidance that people have talked about in what needs to be done so that families, providers, and people who receive services understand what's coming and what we need to do to get there. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. And then just back again, I know you don't have a precise timeline, but is there any, you said the stakeholder meetings will occur by the end of the month. For this, I'm back on question 2, the submittal of the revised plan to CMS. Will it be within this budget year, next budget year? When, any just ballpark figure of, are we talking months?
Well, you got to figure that one, at least through the end of this month, and then there's a minimum of 30 days that'll be needed for public comment, but you also need some time to do a revision prior to that. So keeping those in mind, we're at least a few months away from resubmitting that.
Thank you. And then LAO, any comments on this item?
Thank you, Senator. We have reviewed the governor's proposals related to the HCBS requests, including headquarters, the regional center staff, as well as the resources for transition. We find that the requests for headquarters support and the regional center evaluator positions are reasonable and warranted, and recommend approval of those. With regard to the transitional funding, the $15 million proposed, given the various uncertainties regarding transition and questions that remain, we withhold recommendation on that. We do find that the governor's proposal is a critical next step in towards compliance towards the new HCBS rules. The new rules fundamentally change what it means to be integrated into the community for purposes of federal reimbursement. With regard to that, we note that what we know about what compliance means, our understanding of that is continuing to evolve, especially as assessments go underway. We develop this transition plan, et cetera. With regard to implementation, details are still forthcoming. As the administration has noted, a stakeholder work group will be hosted later this month to help identify guidance and other important resources to direct this transition. With regard to timing, I would note for the committee that the HCBS waiver is up for renewal in March of 2017, and in order to secure renewal and that continued federal funding, the state will need to have a compliance plan or transition plan in place that is acceptable to CMS. Additionally, the 1915I state plan provisions are also up for renewal this fall. It's not clear to us as to whether or not transition planning will need to be farther along at that point in order to kind of continue that renewal. We also note that details are unclear, and the legislature is in a good position to direct parameters for spending of these transitional resources. Questions remain as to what can they be spent on, such as capital outlay and other issues. And finally, good leadership and guidance to regional centers and their providers is really critical for successful transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Finance, anything on this item? Okay, public comment on this item. And again, we'll continue with our goal of 2 minutes per statement. Thank you.
Connie Lapin again. I've come up with a new acronym. It's called PAT, and it stands for a Public Aggressive Timeline. We really are anxious for this to proceed because in the real world, we hear a lot of misinformation. Besides no information, and we all know it's very complicated. One piece that could get started immediately has to do with person-centered planning. Person-centered planning is required with Medicaid waiver and with self-determination and with the new rules. And there's a feeling that the IPP, the individual program plan, is a person-centered plan, but they're different. And I think we need a lot of education in that area. And I think we have a template. The DC closure plan, I mentioned that previously, shows a transition, and we can use that same kind of thoughtful process to transition here, because people are afraid they're going to lose all their services. And the most important, not the most important thing, but a very important thing is to repeal the ban on startups, because that's a way to think out of the box and proceed with new innovative placement supports.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Judy Mark. So I consider these new federal settings rules as being a huge leap forward in civil rights for people with developmental disabilities. And I think that what we should be doing is celebrating these changes that require people to live, work, recreate in the community and not be in segregated environments. What it also means is that we have got to embrace these rules and aggressively move forward. You might hear from some of the people who are standing behind me that we don't have any information, we don't have enough information, or the feds haven't given us enough information. There is a plethora of information out there. Do we know everything? No, we don't know everything. There's still some gray areas. But we're okay. We in the community can live with gray areas, but there still is a lot that is very clear. And so what needs to happen is that we need to get out there and tell people what we clearly know. And if we don't do that now, the people who are going to get screwed in the end are the consumers, are the people with disabilities. We know that there's a bunch of providers who need to know whether their settings are going to be compliant or not. But ultimately, it's the families and consumers who need to know how the opportunities that will exist in their future because of these new rules, and to let them start thinking about what their futures are through person-centered planning. And we need to be out in front on this now, because by 2019, we need to be done with the transition. We're not starting the transition, we're done with it. And we are farther behind than almost every state in the country, and we need to start this now.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you. Marty Yamoto, family member, also with the California Disability Senior Community Action Network and the California Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership. First, want to thank the department for working with us on the home and community-based services regulations over the past several years, and we think their efforts, is really a true partnership with us. But that said, we really encourage your question, Senator Monning, about the timeline and addressing it in terms of how the state is viewing it. And I would suggest that the question really needs to be asked from the perspective of the families and those people who receive services, the workers, the providers. What's their timeline they need to comply by the deadline date of 2019? And the reality is that deadline is much sooner, much sooner. We have providers that have to deal with long-term leases that are coming up or that have already come up on facilities that may not be required under the new rules. It's only required a certain type of facility because state law requires a certain type of facility, under licensing. That may not be necessary under the new rules. Nonprofit agencies have to deal with their board of directors, and they need to have the ability to provide information from the state of California to give their board of directors direction on what and how their agency will transform. All agencies, nonprofit or for-profit, need the information and guidance from the state of California to start talking to the people they serve, to their workers, to the families, about what changes are coming up. As of now, there has been no substantive information coming from the state of California, and it's not for lack of effort from any of the individuals with the Department of Developmental Services or Healthcare Services. But we all need to step up and do a better job in getting this information out, because the timeline that you just asked that question about could have harmful impact on all those people that I just mentioned if we fail to set that timeline, and all of us adhere to it. And that timeline actually is now. It begins now, and we need to take efforts. I have some suggestions with the California Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership.
I'm going to ask you to start to wrap up. So
Is to require that a timeline be set, guidance, outreach, suspension of current state laws to allow programs to transition, and also stakeholder involvement regarding the transition funding proposed by the governor. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Next.
Daniel Savino, Association of Regional Center Agencies. ARCA particularly appreciates the funds in the governor's budget to begin changing programs to meet the HCBS requirements. The amount included is a good down payment for this much needed change, but more will be needed in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Soto with DDSO and also with the Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership. Most of what I was going to say has already been touched on, but I do want to mention that in regard to timelines, there are community providers that have collective bargaining units, and contracts have to be negotiated. Not having a timeline of when things are going to be aligning is a critical issue for the providers that do have collective bargaining units. As a community program entity, essentially, we have several community programs. We're excited about the possibilities with the HCBS. Again, the restrictions of some of the Title 17 and Title 22 and even some Department of Labor regulations kind of interfere with our ability to kind of think out of the box and start some things prior to the actual implementation of the HCBS. And we can't just start, as Marty said, we can't start in March of 2019. We have to deal with our boards, deal with the collective bargaining units, and try to implement some ideas that we think would be fantastic, but we can't move because of licensing requirements, which really make a difference. And relaxing some of the regulations, even if it's on an exception basis, on a trial basis, so that we can start some new and generate some new components to the kinds of things that we could provide to people to be a participant with, to meet their needs. So we're excited, but we're chomping at the bit, and some of the regulations would really help to be relaxed. Thank you.
Witness, 2 minutes, please.
Of course. Good afternoon, Barry Giardini with the California Disability Services Association. We're a provider association who services individuals with developmental disabilities. We appreciate the governor's placement of the $15 million in transition funds into his proposed budget, but we think that's probably going to be woefully inadequate in order to reform many programs. A lot of our members want to comply with HCBS regulations, but they're not sure what the roadmap is, and the state is. We appreciate the efforts of the department, but we realize that the clock is ticking, and we're getting closer and closer, and we're not seeing that roadmap. So we'd like to suggest potentially a legislative oversight committee to manage this. We're talking about almost $2 billion in federal funds that are at stake, so we would just like to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Carter, SLS Director with Choices. I'm here again echoing earlier comments made by Nancy Chance, and on behalf of Choices as members of the California Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership. I'd like to echo what many of the people have said already. We need guidance from the state on how to get in compliance with these new regulations. I can't tell you how to do that, but we need it now so we have time to implement those changes and so we have time to do it right. Thank you.
Comments about the need for clear guidance, also to provide information to providers and decision makers that by assessing settings that require modification come into compliance, and also really taking a look and having the state do a quick fiscal analysis of what it's really going to cost for these settings to come into compliance by talking to regional centers and providers about what that looks like.
Thank you. And next time, either let's see if the mic is on or if we've run through the batteries already. We've done that before.
Carlene Holden with Easter Seals. We've been happy to work with the department on the task forces around the home community-based waiver. I think there's a lot of things we can be doing in the interim.
One of the things I think for us to be fully compliant with a home and community-based waiver, they aren't fitting neatly with licensing requirements. I'd like to see us test out the new money that's going to be invested to make sure that the new services that are going to get launched are going to be 100% compliant with the home and community-based waiver. So I think there's some really exciting things we can do with the resources that are made to invest. I think there's a real issue out there about communication. I'm hearing a lot of people not understanding it the same way as many of us who've already been working with it for a long time do. I think the federal guidance has given us some clarification. I think how fast we move is a whole different question. So I think the more we can get better, more consistent messaging out there, the more helpful it will be. And I thank you for your time and attention on this one.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Hi, first I'd like to say welcome to Director Bargeman on your first day. My name is Terry Rohde from Paradigm, and I have the honor of representing individuals in the Monterey County, Carmel and Salinas area. And I'd also like to speak to this in the sense as a small provider, a small business owner. We're already in the person-centered mindset for our programs, but I need to get the information out to my families and to my staff. So if we could do this in a timely manner, I think it would help everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next witness, 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Shella Dumong, and I am the parent of a 20-year-old son who has Downs and receives services funded through the Regional Center system. I'm also a member of the California Person-Centered Advocacy Project. And lastly, I'm the executive director of a agency in Santa Barbara that provides person-centered housing services strictly to people with developmental disabilities, and we help them access regular community-based affordable and accessible housing. A lot of what I was going to say has been touched on. I just want to mention that with regard to the home and community-based services, sorry, I got to breathe. The California Partnership is going to be doing regional forums, about 8 regional forums throughout the state of California to outreach to family members and find out, you know, what their needs are and how they feel about the transition and the services. I want to thank you all and have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
Aaron Carruthers, State Council on Developmental Disabilities. Want to echo prior comments about this issue being the frontier of civil rights for developmental disabilities. And time is of the essence. Every day, every minute ticking away makes it that much harder to implement it. Really want to appreciate the department being open to the council's offers to be a partner in getting provider certified. We're in every community. We've got the staff. We've got the resources. We want to be a partner. Also can be independent outside of the department to certify these programs. Just want to tee up your next issue item because the next issue item is contingent really on this one. To the extent that California gets its transition plan figured out, it's very unlikely the self-determination waiver will really go through. So thank you.
Thank you. And our final witness.
Tony Anderson on behalf of the Lanterman Coalition. I want to express our support for the administration's proposal to put some funding into a couple of programs to help transition the 6-bed group homes and other programs that are out there so they can convert to programs that are compliant with the HCBS new rules. We think that this is a great step in the right direction. We'd like to see this as the door opening and not shutting. We want to make sure that this is the beginning to some very serious and robust investments into the current system so that it can convert over into what we're all looking to do in our new world order here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will hold this item open. Moving on to issue number 8. Self-determination program.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As noted in the waiver or the agenda, we have submitted an application for federal funding for a waiver to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they did respond as typically happens with the submittal of a waiver with a number of questions asking for clarification. We're working with both CMS and Department of Healthcare Services to respond to these questions and prior to resubmitting the waiver. And while we've completed most of the responses, there is still a few that are left hanging, and one of them has to do, as was teed up for me by Director Carruthers, the issue that we just talked about is how this waiver meets the new federal requirements regarding settings, as opposed to what we're doing currently where we have a transition period. With a new waiver, we have to show CMS how we're meeting the requirements before it's approved. When we initially submitted the waiver, and with the support of the stakeholder advisory group that we were working with on this, we wanted to provide as many opportunities as people have now and make it a broad array of services as well as where people receive those. But it's become pretty clear that having that broad array of settings in particular has caused some delays. It caused delays when we initially submitted the waiver back at the end of 2014 and to this point now. So in looking at what some of our options are and balancing the needs of having the broad array of choices, but with also wanting to get self-determination up and running as quick as possible, we've with the support of the stakeholder work group so far, we have decided we may want to take a look at kind of limiting the places where people receive services. It wouldn't necessarily change the services that are available, but it would change where those services could be delivered, at least initially, with the idea that after we get through the broader transition process, we could take a look back and add some of those settings back in if we wanted to. So again, this would be with the idea of trying to get the waiver and self-determination up and running as quick as possible with as much as we can, but or as many settings or places where people can receive services as possible. So we've been working with a small group of folks and trying to set an aggressive timeline to get what that would look like, what those changes would be, and what that process would be to show CMS that we are meeting the requirements of the new regulations. We have another meeting tomorrow with that group, and then hopefully by next week, then we'll put that process together to present to the broader advisory group to get their buy-off on, is this the way we really want to move forward with, knowing that it is a change from what we put in to begin with. So by next week, and with this, depending on how we decide to go at that point, we'll be able to really then determine what that aggressive timeline will be to resubmit the waiver, because it is going to depend on what we want to do and to meet these settings requirements.
And if you would let the committee staff know once you've kind of come up with that timeline, that would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
Great. Elio? Finance? Senator Monning? We'll open it up for public comment, and you should feel free. Remember, there were several members of the public who were here earlier who had to went early because they had flights. If you just want to ditto some comments that have already been made, feel free to do so. 2 minutes, go ahead.
Okay.
2 minutes.
So this is the reason why we're all up here.
Identify yourself.
Judy Mark again. This is the reason why we're all up here. You were one of our champions of this law. This law was signed by Governor Brown in October of 2013. The thousands and thousands of families and individuals with developmental disabilities are clamoring for the choice and control that self-determination provides. And we know that one of the major barriers right now to making this happen is that it is intertwined with the home and community-based services new rules. And so not only do we need to make progress with our waiver, and we thank the department for being so forthcoming and working so closely with us on this, but we need to move forward on the transition plan. And so that's why that's got to be our priority for us. But I also wanted to let you know that because we're so passionate, we have started a campaign. It's a campaign that we're calling Self-Determination Now, and I have buttons for you, Senator Mitchell, and we are really calling for this to happen now, that we have to get this waiver information back to the federal government, and then we will start the campaign with the federal government and put pressure on them to approve our waiver. So we would love your support in our campaign, and then when it goes to the federal government, we would love your support in weighing in with them to get our waiver approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness, please, 2 minutes.
Connie Lapin. I want to echo what Judy said. One of the things I feel I hear is we can't like really roll it out until we know that the feds approve it and that but I want to say as a family member, and I'm kind of in a hurry because I'm an older family member, but consumers and families have always been in the world of not knowing everything. And so we don't want to wait a minute more about getting the information, the training, and we're gone for a second, and I came up with a new acronym. It's called PAT, Public Aggressive Timeline. I mean, if somebody can help me make it worser or betterer, it would be great. But we want to start now. When we do all these, when Judy does a lot of trainings and we have these local advisory committee meetings, people are excited about it, and it's going to take time. We don't have a workforce out there. So we have to start now to develop it, and we can handle waiting, but we need the information. So, and the department's been great, but we want it faster.
Thank you. Next witness.
Evelyn Abu Hassan with Disability Rights California, and the mic works. How fabulous.
Now.
We know that families and consumers want this. We were one of the co-sponsors of this bill, along with the Autism Society of LA. We want to say we agree with the department's approach in taking a more defined look at the settings that are already compliant and moving forward towards timelier implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next witness. Come on down.
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Carter, SLS Director with Choices Person-Centered Supports. I'm speaking for the third and final time on behalf of Nancy Chance and members of the California Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership. We support self-determination. Let's go.
Got it.
Aaron Carruthers, State Council on Developmental Disabilities, ditto.
Terry DeBell, families from Fairview and Porterville Developmental Center, and a member of the Person-Centered Advocacy Partnership. And yes, this offers wonderful options for individuals who are going to have to fashion some great services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marty Emoto, family member, California Disabilities Community Action Network, and also the California Person-Centered Advocacy Network. And I echo everyone's comments. And there's a Japanese word for hurry, is hayaku. Let's hurry.
Hayapu. Oh, hayapu for the rest of this agenda. Thank you very much. Issue number 9, 4-bed alternative residential model homes.
Right, thank you. The alternative residential model, or ARM, is a rate structure for community care facilities that's based on an assumption that each home would have 6 residents. It was developed years ago, back in the late 80s. So in doing that, the total assumed cost of operating the facility would be divided up over in 6 ways to get the monthly per person rate. Over the last several years, by either regional center and also the people who are receiving the services preference, a number of homes are now serving 4 or less people. Now, it's a good benefit that it often allows people to have their own bedroom, which is more in line with the new, we keep going back to, the new settings requirements. But the struggle that it puts on is that with the rate that's in place now, to have only 4 individuals in the home as opposed to 6 creates a difficulty and doesn't provide adequate funding. So what this proposal does in the governor's budget includes funding to allow for the development of a higher rate for a 4-bed or less facilities. Now, while that's a higher individual rate, it would then allow for those costs, the total cost, to be spread over 4 as opposed to over 6 individuals. So it would take into account that in most cases it would require less staffing, but still some of the other costs are the same whether you're operating a 4 or a 6-bed home. There's also proposed budget bill language that will require annual reporting on the number of homes receiving these rates and will allow for modifications on the actual fiscal impact in future estimates. Thanks.
LAO.
Madam Chair, as noted in your agenda, we do recommend approval of this proposal in concept, given that it is a reasonable way to meaningfully target spending in an area where there are capacity concerns and is consistent with state and federal policy guidance towards facilities that provide for more choice, individual privacy, et cetera. We wouldn't agree with the staff comments that the budget detail on the amount of funding needed is lacking to support the proposal as presented. We have not been provided with sufficient detail as to how the funding amounts were calculated and how they would address this proposal. Thank you.
Finance, any response to that? Senator Monning. Public comment.
Disability Rights California, Evelyn Abu Hassan. I just want to note that we are in support of this proposal. We do note, however, that additional transitional funding may be necessary in the future to come into compliance with HCBS regulations.
Hi, hello, my name is Rashima Hollingsworth, and I just want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'm here on the here today representing over 2,000 facility members for 6 beds. We are a statewide organization and recognized stakeholder representing small residential care facilities. Please approve the $46 million for the 4-bed model, because without it, we're going to close. We're literally going to close. Let's see. I lost my place because all of the homes will be closed because it's not financially feasible with the current funding. The 4-bed model is that's being used right now is based on a 6-bed model rate, despite the high cost per client that we have, that we serve. Each 4-bed home needs about a 21% rate increase just to break even. It's a good concept, but it's very costly for us. I just want to thank you for considering, maybe approving, and thank you for everything that you've done for our industry.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next witness, 2 minutes.
Judy Mark, Autism Society of LA. So while we're sitting here talking about the new home and community-based services rules, and which is the critical piece of how our system is moving forward, talking about moving from a 6-bed to a 4-bed home, to me, is not getting the point of where we are going in the future. It's not that I'm opposed to this in any way. It's that the wave of the future is not that people are going to move into homes with numbers of beds. None of us live like that. The point of the new home and community-based services rules and self-determination is that people with developmental disabilities live as close to the life of a person without a developmental disability as they possibly can. And when you, Senator Mitchell, or I think about our lives, when we don't think about living in a 4-bed home versus a 6-bed home. We think about living in a home, and that home is going to be what we make of it. And so the fact that it becomes a 4-bed home doesn't mean in any way that it's going to follow the home and community-based services rule. There's nowhere in that rule that it says you have to have only 4 beds. What it says is people have to have choice, they have to pick their roommates, they have to be able to decorate them the way they want, they have to be able to eat when they want, eat the kinds of foods that they want within health and safety limits. And so just by saying it's 4 beds doesn't mean in any way it's going to follow the rules in 3 years. So I think that we need to be thoughtful as you're considering that proposal in ensuring that it abides by these new rules and in the new life that we're looking for people with developmental disabilities.
Thank you. Next witness.
Madam Chair, Bob Naylor, representing 6 Beds, Inc., the Association of Small Assisted Living and Adult Residential Facilities. Not disagreeing with the previous speaker, but the point of the $46 million is to make up for past inequities. These are homes that have been almost unable to survive as a result of being restricted to 4. We're not saying 6 is better than 4. We're saying you've got to pay for what you're purchasing in services. And we are also curious about the details of how the $46 million gets allocated and what kind of rate increases will be entailed. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand. Yeah, and so let's, if you could answer the second question again for me if I just missed it. So is this a cap, or are you saying that this is the funding regardless of the number of facilities? Is this the whole deal?
Madam Chair, this amount that is an estimate based on what we expect will be spent in 2016-17. Obviously, as we collect data and the new rate is implemented, that will determine whether the amount goes up or down.
Well, we know that.
So it's not a cap, to answer your question.
Know that by May revise, or that could be a future budget ask?
It would probably be in the following years because we wouldn't have enough data yet on the issue.
Got it. Got it. Okay, we'll be holding that item open. Thank you. Issue 10, Consumer Program Coordinators Funding.